afternoon. Thank you for coming to our interdisciplinary panel on how interdisciplinarity is related to what we do in academia and in industry. Hopefully, our intent here is to focus on the undergraduate side of things, although we're not going to restrict the conversation to that. And on October 3rd, there will be a similar discussion targeted to graduate education specifically. So this is a part of Operation Steamroller, which is the goal of Operation Steamroller is to just get a conversation going on campus about interdisciplinarity, why it's important, how we do it, and also how we can get, what do we have to do to actually make it possible for people to work across disciplines. So I would like to begin by introducing the panelists. Then I will start off with a few questions. If you have questions as we go along, feel free to ask them, and we'll definitely have a section at the end for whatever other issues you'd like to raise. So today we're very fortunate to have all of my colleagues here. Oh, and I think I know everybody, but I'm Stephanie August, by the way, from Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. So today we have four people. When I was looking over the biographies, what was very interesting is that everyone's background is very diverse. They didn't just go through one particular discipline. So I'm not sure what that tells us about what we're doing, but I think it enlightens the future of what types of people we're going to be working with. Instead of being so siloed, we will be more varied in our interests. So we'll start with, I'd like to introduce Eric Strauss first. Eric serves as the President's Professor of Biology and Director of the Center for Urban Resilience with collaborative research specialties in animal behavior, endangered species management, urban ecosystem dynamics, and science education. Eric has extended the model for faculty scholarship by co-founding the Urban Ecology Institute in Boston, where he served as a faculty member at Boston College and Curtiss in LA, both of which provide educational, research, and restoration programs to underserved neighborhoods and residents. In addition, Dr. Strauss is the founding editor of web-based peer-reviewed journal, Cities and the Environment, which is funded in part by the USDA Forest Service. His research includes collaborative long-term studies of coyotes, white-tailed deers, crows, turtles, and other vertebrates. Very nice. With a specialty in understanding wildlife in urban areas and the appropriate management responses to wildlife problems and zoonotic disease. His work also includes investigating the role of green space and urban forests in supporting healthy neighborhoods and how those features can be used to improve science education in underserved neighborhoods. He has co-written multimedia books, textbooks in biology and urban ecology, as well as hosting multiple video series on the life sciences and ecology. Dr. Strauss received his PS in Mass Communication from Emerson College and his PhD in Biology from Tufts University. So, next I'd like to introduce Curtiss Rooks. Yes. Okay. Okay. So, Curtiss Rooks is the Associate Dean of Bellman College of Liberal Arts and a faculty member in the Department of American Cultures. As Associate Dean, he is responsible for interdisciplinary curriculum and scholarship, academic program review, and curriculum assessment. As a faculty member and scholar, Dr. Rooks teaches courses on Asian Pacific American ethnic community, identity, and qualitative methods. This spring, he will team teach a course in systems thinking with Professor Bo Oppenheim from Mechanical Engineering at UCLA. I think actually he's in systems engineering now. His scholarship encompasses two trajectories, one engaged in community-based research and the other in multiracial identity. Dr. Rooks has served as a consultant or fellow to numerous foundations, philanthropy organizations, and community-based organizations, and most recently as a research fellow to the Asian Pacific American Legal Center and Asian American Justice Center on the 2010 census. Currently, he serves on the Gates Millennium Scholars Advisory Council and the steering committee of the Asian Pacific Islander American Scholarship Fund National Higher Education Summit held in Washington, D.C. Additionally, he has spoken widely on Asian American multiracial identity and American diversity issues, and in November he will deliver a series of lectures in China on place, identity, and being. Dr. Rooks earned his BA with a double major in economics and Asian studies from Dartmouth. He received an MA in public policy from Trinity College, and a PhD in comparative culture from the University of California, Irvine. Now we have Michele Hammers. Yes. Michele Hammers is an associate professor in the communications department, and she's a collaborator on the Virtual Engineering Sciences Learning Lab project with me. She's a former lawyer whose graduate studies focused on rhetorical criticism, critical media studies, and public sphere studies. In addition to her training in rhetoric, Dr. Hammers is trained in qualitative research methods and utilizes field research and interviews in her ongoing study of the ways in which the female body and sexuality is perceived and understood in various public and professional arenas. Dr. Hammers teaches both qualitative and rhetorical research methods. She also teaches courses in the rhetoric of popular culture, mediation, and social media. Her scholarship includes analyses of the vagina monologues, Ally McBeal, and popular online fan fiction communities. In addition to her work analyzing popular media, she is interested in ways in which the new communication technologies, such as Second Life, virtual world, may be utilized for pedagogical purposes. And it was that interest that got us tied in together off on our NSF jams. I'm very happy to have Aliza Sorotzkin, from Side Effects with us today. I met her through Adriana Yarozowitz. Aliza is the Global Training and Education Manager at Side Effects. And in case you don't know, Side Effects is a 3D, it's a maker of a 3D animation tool that's widely used in the industry. You've seen its product in your movies. Aliza has worked on feature film production as a TD and digital artist in effects, lighting, and compositing at Sony ImageWorks, Digital Domain, DreamWorks, and Disney Feature Animation. Some of her film credits include Titanic, The Fifth Element, Harry Potter, and The Sorcerer's Stones. Prior to production work, Aliza taught chemistry, physics, and biology in a secondary school in LA. She holds master's degrees in education and instructional curriculum development and a teaching credential from University of California at Los Angeles. Yeah, you see. Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. And I would like to start off by asking everyone on the panel to answer one particular question, which I have here. Just for a moment here.
It's hiding.
It is hiding. Okay. It's not something I shouldn't be able to remember. So I would like to know, or for you to tell the audience, what has brought you to work across traditional disciplinary boundaries, and basically why this topic is of interest to you. So why is it that you agreed to join this panel today? So we will start with Dr. Hammers.
Well, I think, first of all, you should know that I have, all my degrees are in different fields. So I have a BS in business, I have a law degree, a master's in film and media studies, and then a PhD in comm. So my training has always been eclectic, so I didn't come to work on interdisciplinary projects as an accident this late in my career. I've always approached things from a very eclectic sort of, I just want to sort of know what's out there and tackle material from different perspectives. And that was reinforced when I was a lawyer, because as a litigator, you are an expert in process, and then you gain expertise in content areas as you need it to help your clients solve their problems. So I became adept at and fascinated with the idea that you can learn content, right? What you have to do is focus on the problem to be solved, focus on the situation that you're in and what you need to accomplish, and then you can learn content. And so to talk to experts or talk to clients that were experts in oil and gas, I learned to develop expertise as I needed it, and I found that to be really thrilling. So I've always had this intellectual curiosity about other people's issues and other people's work and other people's areas. So that makes it very easy to cross disciplines in scholarship, because when I see an issue or I see a problem or I see a topic, I'm not thinking about it in terms of what I already know. I'm thinking about it in terms of what do I need to know to get to an end result. So I think it's really sort of, whether I was born with it or whether it was an accident of my early training where I moved around a lot and got used to sort of change and adaptation, I think that's how I got here. So it may seem accidental, but I've sort of been doing it kind of my whole life.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I started out my undergraduate training in mass communication at a radio show in Boston, and I fell in love with the notion of narrative and how powerful stories are in the construction of how we view ourselves as individuals, how we see ourselves fitting into culture. This was in the late 1970s, sort of before the digital revolution, when every community was building their own FM radio community because of the limits of the technical capacity long before satellite radio and television brought everybody together. So there was a booming market in almost every small city for competent people who could be on the air. And that's where I was headed. And as I was going into my senior year in college, I became very disillusioned with the training that we were receiving. We were being taught to be great storytellers, but in the service usually of selling something to somebody who might not really need what we were telling them they needed to buy. And I had a real crisis of conscience and actually went back to my former high school ecology teacher, who had since entered a PhD program in Boston. And I started showing up at their seminars in the afternoon. And this was at the period of time when a phenomenon called sociobiology was first being explored, which was taking an evolutionary perspective on a whole variety of cultural things that happen both in animal and non-human communities. And it lit up my imagination. And I within just a couple of months, I realized, what I really need to do is get a PhD in biology, which is somewhat non-traditional since I hadn't actually had any science courses as an undergraduate. But those things can be worked out. And so I entered the sciences with the perspective of seeing how powerful science could be as a tool for making social change. The investigation part was critical, but people didn't fall in love with perfect graphs and perfect formulae. A few people did. But the general public fell in love with outcomes. And so I saw immediately this connection between science as a tool of sort of pushing back the darkness in the context of knowledge, but more important as a lever to bring politically and socially disparate groups together to have a conversation with data and driven around outcomes that we could all understand. And I was lucky enough to get faculty appointments where either my dean or department chair recognized that was, if not unique, at least a novel perspective to bring into science departments. So I began teaching at the University of Massachusetts, and my first task was to revamp their entire undergraduate first-year biology experience and the labs. And I just created the theme of Boston as a living ecosystem. And that was how we would structure the course, and that's how we would structure the lab. And I saw it as a great opportunity. And then I went on to Boston College, which didn't have an environmental studies program at the time, and they wanted a scientist who could think broadly enough to develop those curricula. And Boston College was still pretty limited as a traditional university bound within the stovepipes of its disciplines. And it was clear that if we were going to really work towards solution space as opposed to discipline building, we needed to work outside, both in the teaching and in the vocational discernment of our students. So we started a nonprofit organization on campus called the Urban Ecology Institute, which is a standalone 501c3. And by the time I left there to come here, we had 16 full-time people, so actually larger than a number of the departments. And we're providing all kinds of interdisciplinary services, from research opportunities to standalone courses to summer internships to projects in Costa Rica, looking at urban ecology in those settings. And then the opportunity to come here as a president's professor, which by design was supposed to work across traditional boundaries. We don't have university professorships here, but this is as close as you get to that. So literally here with the charge of saying, how can you come up with models to work across traditional campus boundaries and to think about courses that go outside of traditional boundaries. And so it's a delightful opportunity. And so we had the opportunity here to start a new center for urban resilience. And with great gratitude from me to the administration. At Boston College, they basically gave us space to start the Urban Ecology Institute and no money to start, so it takes a long time to get going. Here, there were some resources to begin with, and so that's been very helpful. So in the 2 years I've been here, we have a new graduate program, an interdisciplinary graduate program in urban ecology. We are just about to open the new Discovery Park over the bluff that opens on the 1st of October, which will be a site for both formal and informal science education. We're working in a dozen high schools now. And so I see both the ability to bring people of different age and different social identities to this community of scholarship improves not only our scholarship as faculty and our discernment of our undergraduates, but allows the capacity of the university to be felt across a larger social and demographic space. It can't be done unless we're willing to work across departments. We're too small an institution.
Thank you.
Aliza.
Yeah.
So similar to Michele and your just intellectual curiosity, I think, is what drove me to explore the sciences and the arts. And so for me, I started out, and I think just an exploration of yourself through growing up. I mean, I'm a twin.
Oh,
and
wow.
So, fraternal twin, and I have a sister 1 year older. And so it was really a little bit difficult for me to find my identity early on. And there was quite a lot of expectation in my family. We have a lot of doctors in my family. So my older sister is a physician, and for many years I just followed her footsteps. So my BS in biology, pre-med. And it wasn't until later, and I started teaching as well, student teaching chemistry while I was in my undergraduate years. But it wasn't until I started more self-exploration, realizing although I was also minoring in fine arts at the time, that's where my true love was kind of pulling me toward the creative, to the arts. And not to mention that I kind of faint at the sight of blood. So,
Darwin too. That's
yeah.
right.
So I had to, just resolve that. But in the meantime, I did teach in the sciences at the secondary level, and then I had an opportunity back in about 1994, where there were some computer classes being offered in Prisms, which is the precursor to Houdini software. I worked for VFX Software, which is a world-renowned, high-end visual effects and animation software, and Prisms was the precursor. The company's 25 years old. And so I started taking these courses. This was offered, just some courses by some industry folks, and then I realized, wow, this is really exciting. I mean, my strengths, which I wasn't really clear exactly where this was going at that time, but the curiosity, and I felt at home. So I had science, I had technology, I had art. It's very cool. And I had an opportunity to do a temporary job for, maybe some of you remember the film Fern Gully, The Lost Rainforest. Well, this was just a temp for hire digital painting. I was like, okay, I'll try it. So this was 2D painting, and I spent 10, 12 hours a day painting cells. And I thought, this is so awful. I'm not going to stay in this field. I didn't see the long-term trajectory of where this field was going at the time. But some of those folks who are now well-known in the industry, I don't know, some of you might know Steve Wright, who teaches around the world, some of the folks I worked with said, try 3D, it's more challenging. So I said, okay, I'll try 3D. So I picked up some jobs where I could work at, actually it was just around the corner here, VFX, which got kind of melded into Rhythm and Muse. And I worked on some not very memorable films, but I got to pick up skills as I went. And of course, when you're at a studio, you're given classes by experts. So I had the advantage of, yeah, there weren't really programs, too many at the time, that were offering programs in the area. So many of us who came from many different areas fine artists, there were graphic artists, print, there were aerospace engineers, there were just all different people coming into the field in that time. And so, but what I think allowed me to really hit the ground running with was that I came from this this multidisciplinary background, that it was so natural to me that it was my strengths. I could, fly with the fact that, wow, I have the creative aspect, which I love, and this technical part that is also and the spatial, three-dimensional aspect. So that's what I ended up doing for a number of years, about 8 years, at the studios, and I enjoyed it a lot. And it was a wow to be able to step into a field as it was really exploding, and to work on some Oscar-winning shows like Titanic and Chubb-Chubbs and many other films, Dinosaur and other films at various studios. And I think also the fact that I had taught and had learned communication skills, presentation skills, was really helpful, because when you're in a studio and you're showing off your work in front of 100 people in a theater, big theater, you have to be able to communicate quickly your ideas, so that was helpful. And then, as I'm getting older, I decided, well, maybe these late nights, and maybe I ought to, see what else, some possibilities for me, and that was quite nice. At the time, I was just wrapping up some work at DreamWorks. It was also a little bit of a commute, because I was commuting from the West Side, and I thought, well, maybe Side Effects has a local office. Their head office is in Toronto, a Canadian company with a wholly owned subsidiary here. Perhaps they could use some help with their education department. And sure enough, they had an opening. I knew several of the people there. And so since I started there, they had a very small training effort. And we've grown tremendously. So I run a 12-seat lab, a training facility. I run an internship program for college graduates. So run about 20 odd per year run through my program. And these are effects, gaming, and animation interns from all over the world. As a matter of fact, right now I have from the Netherlands, I've had from England before, I've had Singapore students as well, visiting Singapore students. And I run universities and school institutes around the world that would like to incorporate Houdini software. I'm the point of contact, so I work with them. So it's the schools, the internship program, the training is what I'm doing for Side Effects. And I really think that the juggling all these hats probably would have been really difficult for me as an individual if I hadn't come from this interdisciplinary background that I have.
For me, the notion of crossing boundaries was sort of something I was born into. My mother is native Japanese, my father African American. We're bilingual, binational, bicultural household. So the notions of boundaries just didn't make a whole bunch of sense, because my body told me they weren't, that they were fictions. Being a child of the late 50s and watching our communities through the civil rights movement of the 60s, and watching my mom cross boundaries as this Japanese woman working with African American women to form community organizations to raise money to help send the high school graduates to college so they could buy their books or pay tuition or those sorts of things, working with very little but their own skills, whether it was the ability to cook, my mom's ability as a seamstress to be able to look into a book and copy a costume if they were doing a show featuring costumes from around the world, sort of as a fundraiser, those sorts of things. And watching how these these women in particular, again, sort of reached into what they had, the skills that they had to make the community richer. Moving around a lot too as a military vet, but just to be able to see that, it was sort of both what I was born into, both what I was socialized into at a time in the world where the complexities of the issues facing us were brought to the fore. We couldn't just talk about race, we couldn't just talk about gender, we had to talk about class, we had to talk about structure, right? Those sorts of things. By the time I get to college, I ended up double majoring. My economics degree really looks at finance and those sorts of things. And my Asian studies degree is in culture as seen through traditional literature and translation, looking at Japanese and Chinese culture. So one left side, one right side brain thing. In part, one to make parents happy, one to make me happy, all those things that go with it. And I ended up becoming a football coach, go figure. So of having had a very varied life, went from there and worked in student affairs, got a master's in public policy, starting to take a look at how those different social issues impacted policy. While I was an associate dean of students at Pomona College and the Claremont Colleges, I also taught with the government department in a first-year seminar called Ethnicity and Public Policy. So starting to bring together sort of the life that I lived as a child growing up and what I saw and experienced, what I had started to learn in the classroom, those sorts of things, whether it was through economics, through Asian studies, starting to bring those things together with a master's in public policy. While teaching that class, I realized that if I wanted to do this more often and for a living, I needed to go back to school again. I ended up going to UC Irvine and getting a interdisciplinary degree in American Ethnic Studies with an emphasis in cultural anthropology. And even within that, I did what is known as, since there's mathematicians, mathematical ethnographer, but with a small m. And so, and through that, I worked on the Exxon Valdez oil spill with my mentor and others, and sort of really began to take a look at how do we bring these different skills to complex problems, not only to the policy arena, but also to the where it affects you on the street, the lived areas. And with that, I began working with different groups of collaborative teams, interdisciplinary collaborative teams that were facing and dealing with different social issues that were there, particularly for communities of color. Teamed with Dr. Cheryl Grills here at LMU, Dr. Abe here at LMU, Shane Martin here at LMU, and we worked in a group called Imoesha on a major grant with the California Wellness Foundation called the Community Youth and Children, Youth, and Community Health Initiative. We brought interdisciplinary teams together, both doing qualitative, quantitative. We brought historians into it. We brought psychologists into it. We brought sociologists into it. Because the issues that, as well as medical professionals, the issues that these communities were dealing with were not single issues. They were systems issues. And you cannot approach the solutions to those without it being sort of a systems. Not only the sort of system that has to deal with getting healthier diabetes or sort of diabetes treatment, those things, but also the issues of identity, how they saw themselves in this world, their place in this world, the chances, their life chances for use vapor. So what they hope to achieve, how they can be agents for change in their own lives, like the women that I watched in the 60s. How do you sort of pull on the skills that you have to sort of create the other things? So in some cases it was doing gardens, community gardens that brought people together from different communities and different places where they could share their stories of what it meant to grow their own foods. Another place it was really about bringing dentists in and having dental clinics. And so for each of these communities, we had to sort of be able to understand them for how they saw their own realities and what was most important to them, rather than coming in as experts and saying, you need this, and now we're going to give it to you, and you'll be better, right? But to say to them sort of, how do you see your lives? What's important to you? And how can we make what you wish for your lives? How can we make manifest those things, right? And so bringing our expertise to the issues that they identified. and recognizing that we weren't the smartest people in the room. We're just the ones who had more school, right? And then applying that school to their expertise in their lives. So for me, the notion of being able to take a look at things from an interdisciplinary perspective in the university, to begin not only the training of our students, but the training of ourselves in that, even though many of us were brought, well, I was lucky I was brought up less than, but even my early, sort of these disciplinary areas, the silos of it, right? To bear on the great sufferings of this world, however you wish to define them. It never made much sense to me. I'll start where I began. Being born into a bilingual, binational, biracial, bicultural household, that things were separate, right? It's not the world I've ever known, and it's not the world it's not the world's problems that I think I can solve by being in a silo.
Thank you. That's an interesting point that I wanted to get into next, that idea of it's a complex world, and that's why we need to actually do this. So the next question I'd like to direct to Aliza, excuse me. So from what you see in training these students in special effects software and from your other experiences, we've talked about why we're here. Why do the students need to be there from what you see? Why do the students need to have a broad background or be interested in things from a multidisciplinary perspective?
Well, if you think about what we're asking, or what I'm asking from, for example, my interns, they're working in very sophisticated software, but also they have to have the observation skills of an artist to understand lighting, understand perspective, composition. So there's a real need for studying. Lost my train of thought. For studying across these subjects. I mean, in the field that I'm in visual effects, there can be tool builders, which could be very focused on coding. Then there could be just artists who are painting, let's say matte painters, for example. But largely, the artists that I'm training are somewhere in that spectrum, right? That are both technical problem solvers, and I think bringing to the point of a very complex world. Well, look at these. I mean, you all have seen the visual effects and the animation show. They're phenomenal. It's amazing what we're seeing. It's stunning, and the stereoscopic films, and it's just mind-blowing. So just the solutions. I mean, these artists, these visual effects artists, are asked to solve complex problems and also very novel problems. They're all new. When you're in for example, my experience in production, one thing I so enjoyed was the coming up when at the time you had the time element as an artist. There was more creative time allowed. So the director might say, hey, I don't know what we're going to do with this scene or this shot. Like I was working on Polar Express, the opening shot of the train coming in, and that was my shot. And I was like, I'm not sure. We want clouds. We don't want to see the train at first. Can you just come up with some ideas? How exciting is that? Where you have a certain style you're trying to achieve. You're trying to solve this. The motion of the train coming into the shot a certain time in this many frames. I mean, they're complex problems that require a holistic approach and new, just multiple areas of your brain.
students need to be concerned about this, or administration?
Well, first of all, we've inherited a university system that goes back centuries in its structure. And also, as a scientist, we benefited from the Enlightenment, this sort of pulling apart and placing into separate contexts different ways of knowing about the world. And in some respects, that's what's made it safe to be a scientist or be a philosopher or something like that in the intellectual environment, because of these pulling apart and creating what are essentially safe spaces to consider these ideas. But we've moved into what some people will describe as a post-factual world. If we need specific information, we can go and get it, and we can get it pretty easily. And one of the hardest suite of skills to teach any stakeholder, whether it's a student or someone from a community, is how do you interpret that flow of information that's coming at you? And how do you pick out the pieces that are critical to forming a worldview that's actually going to be successful towards your problem? When you were talking about the visual effects, my work is in bioacoustics. We do a lot of digital sampling, and so going from being a radio disc jockey to recording birdsong wasn't that big a jump. But you think about the digital technologies and sound. Well, when you look at things like an MP3 file, somebody had to figure out what 95% of the data to throw away, so the 5% that remained could be easily stored, and we still hear most of the music. I mean, that's a pretty sophisticated analysis, but it's a metaphor for what we're asking young people to do. There is an absolute wall of data that moves toward them, and this challenge of trying to understand the difference between what is known and what is actually true are the suite of skills we're trying to develop. So we create a backpack that has a certain set of skills. They might be mathematical, they might be historical, they might be language-based, they might have legal scholarship as its foundation, but that's never going to be enough, because it's actually the sophisticated suite of filters that we need to build. And then we add to this, the students who leave any university are profoundly privileged. Right? Only about 5 out of every 100 children on the planet get to go to college. So no matter how you got here, you are privileged in the global context. So how does that privilege translate into your concern about the way in which situations are in the world, and how are you going to make those changes, and how are you going to work toward those changes? And so, we're really asking the graduates of an institution like this to have not only a set of specialized skills, which will be important, but this overarching filter system of knowledge that helps to place into context this swarm of data around somebody's head, as well as the issues of social justice that are going to help you create the foundation of which this information is going to be organized. And then this idea, you've described how many things you've done in your life, but for the students we're in service to now, the first generation that will routinely live to be 100 years of age, no matter what they could train for now, it's not what they're going to be doing in 25 years. The technology will already have turned over, and they're going to have to be facile, they're going to have to be resilient, and be able to move across an arc of multiple careers. And without an interdisciplinary perspective and training, that moving across the careers. I mean, I was just thinking of your description of being a school teacher. That sets you apart from other artists. You showed up on time, you understand schedules, because your world was around bells and 12-minute lunches, right? I grew up as a military kid too, and so changing directions is okay. I'm used to things starting at a time, ending at a time, getting ready to do stuff, moving every 2 years. That's what you did. That's what you did. So you bring those skills to bear.
Michele, I'm going to change the question a little bit on you.
Oh dear.
Now that we've brought up this notion of filters when we're getting information, there's the other side of it, communicating information to people from different worlds.
Yes, I was thinking about what Eric was saying in terms of this ability to reskill and to sort of retrain and to retool is essential. To do that well over your lifetime, I think starting from an approach that says it's not about the discipline of the silo, it's about the content and the knowledge and the necessary skills. And but also the communication side of that. Communication studies as a discipline is already interdisciplinary. So we don't just do public speaking. We study interpersonal, organizational. We do it from multiple methods. So my discipline is used to the idea that we're have a very applied component. And it really is essential for people, whether you're speaking to 100 people trying to pitch an idea, or you're talking to a community trying to help them understand, or have them help you understand a problem, or you're talking in a room like this, to be able to get your ideas across effectively. And that's another sort of inherent skill set, writing and speaking. And it's enhanced by this interdisciplinary sort of approach, because if I'm an expert in one thing, I may only be comfortable talking about that one thing. But if I feel like I have expertise or I can develop expertise, then I'm comfortable entering a room with strangers that I don't know and taking on a topic and applying my knowledge and my filters in sharing those, because I have confidence in my ability to communicate. So I think that as we train students in this interdisciplinarity, one important component of that should always be attention to their writing and speaking skills, whether it be through foundational core courses or integrating it into a classroom. And I don't mean get up and give the peanut butter jelly speech where it's like, how do you eat a sandwich? I mean actually integrating it into their discipline, actually teaching them and showing them how, whether it be disciplinary or across disciplines, they can use these skills effectively. So I think that's part of an interdisciplinary approach. And, part of that skill tool backpack they need to have, and those filters needs to have to do with the ethics of how you argue and persuade. And it needs to have to do with how do you analyze an audience, how do you know where they're coming from, and how you can best reach them. So I think that's an important. And with the silos that we've had over the history, we've seen people get content expertise, but they don't always develop the communication expertise or the delivery expertise, or they don't learn to work well with people across disciplines. And so when they're in a situation where they have to lead a group, and the group is not just like them, they can't fall back on a basic skill set. So I think that part of this is also, when you move between disciplines, you learn to communicate with people who aren't like you, and you learn to sort of work it out, And that's really valuable, because over their lifetimes, as they change careers and career paths, our students are going to have to navigate different types of employment situations, different political situations. I mean, it's just a really practical set of issues.
I mean, there's clear that they're going to have to be able to nimble, they'll have to be able to be flexible. And as we say this, right, because a major role that, in the work that I do, one of the major roles we play is as translators, how we translate people's lives into whoever we need to talk to. We need to translate their lives into someone who wants it in quantitative measures. We've got the group of people who can translate that. We need to translate it into a visual medium. We need to translate it into a print media that's telling stories. We need to translate it into drama. I mean, we do all that. But I think the thing that we have to also remember is sort of this movement into interdisciplinarity, right? That we also have to be able to allow our students to ground themselves in something deeply enough with which to appreciate the other disciplines, right? I mean, it just can't be sort of half that floating around, without being able to be having some anchor, right? And then that anchor be able to apply that in and be open to, right? I think that one of the things that interdisciplinarity and the training of interdisciplinarity I think does best for us that breaks the silo is that, again, you're not the smartest person in the room. You have a particular type of knowledge, and in order for us to affect the change that we're seeking, I need to draw on other people's knowledges so that we can then articulate a message or a solution or whatever it is, whether it's a visual piece, whether it's a technical report that has great mathematical analysis to it, whatever it happens to be able to then articulate that message to the audiences that need to hear it for the effect that the effect or the outcome which you're desiring, right? To solve whatever the issue at hand. But I think being able to work with others, being able to be generous to receive their expertise, even when it conflicts with mine, right? And it's just hard because we're trained to be the smartest in what we do and challenge anybody who comes after us, right? But that generosity to be able to receive that, to say, when we bring when we bring it all together, there's something that we could not have imagined, right? In the full Jesuit sense of imagination, where creativity meets reality. We could not have imagined the solution, right? And it's until we have that generosity, right, that allows that. And I think that's the place where, that's the biggest challenge for us in the academy. We are not trained to be generous with someone outside of our bucket, right?
I have a question that kind of relates to what you were saying, I think, but also to what Dr. Strauss was saying about different safe compartments and so forth. Why couldn't a university like LMU have a place where students could go who are kind of weighing what to take, what to major in now, and so forth, set up a little differently than what it is now. Just to give you an example, Laura, my wife, is an administrative assistant in chemistry, and she is always meeting students, and I often meet them, who are perhaps majoring in chemistry or biochemistry, but they kind of also like communications, and I want to kind of do something in communications too, or maybe minor in that or something. But this seems to be kind of a pulling two ways that doesn't enhance the career of the person very well. In other words, some teachers are saying, well, if you kind of water down your time by fooling around over there in communications, you're going to do not so good in chemistry, and so on like that. So what I'm thinking, couldn't there be an office or something in the LMU where people could go and consult on when they feel sort of interdisciplinary but don't know what to do with that, how they could consult and kind of have it worked out and get some good ideas of how those two interdisciplinary things could really work together and enhance each other, and so they wouldn't work against, but they'd really work together.
It sounds like that goes back in part to the idea of, is participation something, a matter of giving up, or is it a matter of getting something else from it?
Well, I mean, I think there's certain ways that we do it at the university, or rather we have several interdisciplinary programs where a student can bring those different knowledges together, like an environmental studies program, urban ecology programs, where we bring the different knowledges, and in those two specific majors where you're trying to bring those knowledges to bear on something, right? And a specific issue at hand, being able to do an environmental impact report and then having to present that in public as part of the public discussion session. Sorry, but I mean, because Eric and I work on this together.
I would say that the desire for that idea is very potent and very strong. And one of the challenges is that whenever you set up in the current structure of a university an advising center, there's an advocacy piece here. Because in the end, we count our majors, we count our FTEs and things like that. One of the real great forums for interdisciplinarity is when we do internships and research, and engage students in taking their knowledge into a setting that's outside the university context or research. And that forces the development of a suite of skills related to communication and interpretation and so forth. Some universities get around this interdisciplinarity. So for instance, College of the Atlantic in Maine has only one major. Everyone who goes there is a human ecology major, which is a deeply interdisciplinary program. And they're a small enough institution that they can pull it off, but they've been doing it for a century now and doing it reasonably well. And so they've reduced, they flattened this competition for counting the majors this way or that way. So it's inevitably profoundly interdisciplinary. And in fact, the Society of Human Ecology is based out of there, and they have a conference every other year. And so it's a very interesting institution to go to when you see how they've structured it. It's not the model for the modern university. The modern university is department-based, and we tend to grant our tenure there and grant orient our grants to the particular department. So we're going to have to do it through centers and through extracurricular experiences related to internships and research experiences and cutting across these boundaries through trips and shared faculty engagement. The core needs to do a really good job at interdisciplinary, because that's the one opportunity that you have, or not one, you actually are taking a certain number of courses, but you really have an opportunity because faculty who are teaching in the core are going to have to be teaching across a variety of experiences of their students.
Go
I
ahead.
just
Don't
want
want
to
to
add
go to
what
Aliza,
Dr.
then
Rooks
Elaine, then
and Dr.
Michele.
Strauss said that I completely agree with being rooted in a specialization is extremely important, and having then a holistic kind of framework. So in my industry, when I hire between interns and mentors, industry mentors that I bring in regularly from the studios, local studios, and professors and residents, I don't know, over probably around 40 people a year. And they come with their specialties, and it's very important to stress that, because studios are going to be hiring for a particular specialty, even within, for example, effects. You might be the ocean person, or the pyro effects person, or the smoke person. It's that level of specificity in the specialization within a framework of, you know how to get data in and out, you know how to, you know, what makes a good looking shot, all of that sort of thing. And then the other point that Dr. Strauss made, I want to wholeheartedly agree. Internships, it's absolutely, from my experience of now many years of running internship program and opportunities for college grads and professors and residents, and with industry mentors. That's the key. It's by far, many of them have said to me that this has been such a rich experience. I mean, not that their college education wasn't useful, but you know, if there is some way of maybe doing it in the same time during maybe the senior year or something like that for undergraduate, maybe kind of interesting.
Elaine, you want Elaine? Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Heather.
it's okay. I think everyone's kind of touched on that point that it's kind of hard to make an interdisciplinary degree program, because then you put it under all those constraints. And I think for all of you, and for myself, being someone who has, 4 different degrees in 4 different areas, you don't really plan to get those 4 different degrees in 4 different areas. It just kind of happens to you as you go. And there's no way to kind of predict, someone wants to be interdisciplinary. Predicting or trying to map their interdisciplinary route is almost the antithesis of being interdisciplinary. Like, it just comes, it's more fluid than that. So I completely agree that having that base in a field, there's nothing wrong with that. It's traditional, it's what's happened. But I think we need more of that, of students being able to go across their discipline to do research maybe in another department. I have an studio art major who now wants to come do public health research with me. And she, and so somehow, over time that will come together for her, but it's just my job to show her, this is a public health experience. And maybe you'll find your niche of how art might fit in. Maybe it'll be community health science education and using art to educate about public health or chronic disease. Who knows? I can't predict that for her, but I can provide her with an opportunity to learn something else and to have a different experience that she's not getting in her major. So I think it would be great to be able to have an IDP degree for students, but you're still not going to be able to predict that course that they're going to take in life if they become a truly interdisciplinary person, because it's something I couldn't, I started off as a traditional molecular bio major, and I couldn't have predicted picking up degrees in policy and public health and FE and all these other things at that time. But I had various experiences that built on themselves. So I really think we should just push more for allowing students to cross over into different disciplines to do a research project or an internship, and not saying, hey, why are you going from art to health and human sciences for an internship? Let them cross over. They might come back and say, hey, that wasn't a good fit. Or maybe they'll go to accounting or wherever. but allowing them to have that opportunity is what feeds the interdisciplinary field.
So I have a sort of follow-up on this. I think that your point about sort of having this ability to sort of let them have these experiences. And so one of the things that, in terms of your question about advising centers, it would be nice if we had a more coordinated ability to connect students with faculty across disciplines and boundaries, so to help them facilitate that. So one of the things that our silos and stovepipes tend to do is that we don't always know what our colleagues across the hall, much less across the campus, are doing. So if I have a student coming to me, a brilliant student who wants to work in public health, I may not know that there's a faculty member who is willing to have those cross-disciplinary experiences. Students often assume that I can't approach an econ professor if I'm not in econ because they won't want to work with me. I'm not one of theirs. So I think one of the things that this advising question raises is sort of how do we support students to make maximum use of the electives that they do have. So perhaps they don't always need to have a minor. They don't always have to have the full 6 classes or the full minor, but they should be encouraged to dabble. That's why electives are there. It's to explore both breadth and depth. But we don't really have, like, there's no sort of university register of what an elective is. Students are left sort of finding out, course, department by department, which classes are open to non-majors, which aren't. It can be this sort of hunt and seek kind of thing. So I think that there are things the university could do to help facilitate that sort of, these are elective options, these are classes that are open for non-majors, these are internships that are open for non-majors, to make it a little bit easier to pave the way. And working across boundaries, so I happen to know that what Curtiss's expertise is, I can send someone to him and say, this is one of my really good students who's desperate to get some interdisciplinary experience. Let's sort of set this up. So I think the university could do more on that front. Make it less about where the majors go, where the FTEs go, and more about connecting faculty who make it also some exciting intellectual companionship from their students. The ORSP does that sort of for faculty. They will put faculty together with each other on projects. So we have a place to go to sort of say, hey, I have this great idea, but I need a mathematician and a storyteller and someone else. And Joe and his staff will put those teams together. Students don't always have that. So, sorry. Hi, Joe.
Well, and they're not even sure how to ask for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the role that we play in loco parentis. I mean, we're supposed to provide that sense of direction and say, what about thinking about this? Or what about thinking about that?
That's where I go back to this notion of generosity, though, right? If I have a student coming into my class from a different discipline that I'm teaching, to be generous that they may not have the some of the broad-based knowledge of someone else who's in my major would have, so I don't ding them. I mean, the students aren't idiots. They also know they're in a GPA game and their grades and all those things that go with it. But I remember once Eric and I were talking about this thing. I could see in 25 years from now that our majors would be very nimble, based on societal problems, and that your minor serves the major. So you'd be you get your depth in history, your depth in bio, but your major is on migration, or your major is on urban sustainability, right? These broader interdisciplinary things, so that right now our minors, and most of our interdisciplinary minors, serve to complement our majors, right? Flip that, and it takes a great exercise of self-identity. You really have to be real comfortable with yourself to do that as an anthropologist or a biologist. I mean, because you're willingly de-emphasizing what makes me me, right? Because this is what I've gotten all the goodies for, right? So that as universities, looking at what is it, because we do know things are going to change so much, but there are these places, these problems, these areas where we can bring people together in service of that. Will it happen? Perhaps, but it would happen when our students become the chairs, the deans, the provosts. Will we be generous enough to open ourselves up to taking someone from communications in my lab on X, Y, and Z, and not feeling like I'm shutting out one of my students from that opportunity? So, I mean, for those of us in other positions, we have to try to create the reward system, or at least the non-penalty system. I mean, at first we'll just try to get the non-penalty system into the reward system that says, when you do that will be valued.
Aliza?
If you have time. I also just want to say, I guess I'm the outsider here, but in terms of the private industry skill sets that are needed, I mean, we talk about interdisciplinary, and there's a real need for technical skills. And so I see, you know, any major that, you know, whatever it is, that digital technical skills are very useful and something that many industries, not just my industry, I mean, that what I see out there, not necessarily there's a jobs crisis, there's a skills crisis.
You know, it's interesting.
Technical skills.
In all our debates on the core, because I was on that core curriculum committee, when I went through Dartmouth, every major, no matter what major you were, learned to write code. Kimony was our president, and he had been one of the people, you know, co-founders of BASIC, right? So every person who graduated in my generation could at least write basic code, right? For almost all of us, that has put us so much further ahead of the people that we're competing against. You know, my first job as a dean of students, I had to go in and write code, learn a language, write code to just do data systems, right? Anybody I was competing against from any other background that didn't have that code writing ability put me ahead of them, right? And I did Asian studies, culture, seen through traditional literature, but I could write code. I mean, and I think that in a sort of our battle, right? I mean, as much as I love the arts, and I think it's vitally important because it helps us actually figure stuff out, the STEM part of it is just as valuable. And we have to figure out a way to sort of do that, I think, in a meaningful way.
Oh, yes.
Curtiss, I need you to come talk to my math kids. Even they don't want to write code.
Code is interesting.
Yeah, I was very struck by what Dr. Strauss said about that kind of reminder that those of us who are privileged enough to be sitting in this room debating these issues, that we are the 5%. And you know, I went through elementary school and high school with a lot of arts in a public school setting. You know, lots of arts, lots of really rich, diverse science opportunities, lots of field trips, lots of these really, really rich primary and secondary experiences that I think really primed me for a college experience. And my career path has been very meandering as well. And I'm wondering what your observations are on the students who are coming in to LMU as freshmen. How are they prepared, or how are they unprepared for these sort of interdisciplinary connections? You know, I've got a 6-year-old who's in first grade now in the LAUSD, and I know that Dr. Strauss, you're very involved with Playa Vista and trying to answer some of these questions. How do you think that parents and primary and secondary instructors can or aren't preparing this next generation of college students to meet these challenges and opportunities that you're all talking about?
I'd like to take James' question and modify it just a bit because we're almost out of time. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to address a similar issue, like what is it that we can do to make this happen for the people, or what should we, just what can we do, what should we be doing? So.
I don't know because I don't have children, and so I don't really actually know. So on that,
you work with you have 18-year-olds, 17 and 18-year-olds.
No, so I was going to say, but I don't know. I actually don't find this an intellectual problem. I think that what I see is they often have information paralysis. I feel like they haven't developed the right kinds of filters. So they think they can do everything. They want to do everything. They want to be involved in everything, and they're not good at priority setting. So interdisciplinarity for them can be an overwhelming thing because they don't know how to ground themselves first and then move out. So I think that really emphasizing choice making and prioritization, less than the intellectual content. You know, they can learn the content, but what I see them struggle with is this ability of developing a sense enough of themselves to make some choices and not feel like I either have to do everything or I have to focus on just one thing, because I see them get sort of this paralysis of wanting to do everything and not being able to do it well or not be able to make choices. And so I think that's more of a personal judgment criteria that parents should be instilling. And then in terms of how to make it happen, I think these kinds of conversations, collaborations for faculty so that we open ourselves up and begin to break down our own silos. The only way that I'm ever going to know how to send a student through those paths is if I sort of follow them myself. So as challenging as it can be to work across disciplines, and it doesn't always feel like it's rewarded in our current reward system, because you might write 10 grants and they don't hit, and so you spent 6 years writing grants and you don't have any pubs, and so our reward system in some ways sort of perversely counterintuitive for this kind of work. I think we have to put ourselves out there and set an example for our students, and I think then it will begin to break down those walls sort of from the inside, slowly erode them.
So I would just add that from the standpoint of being comfortable in the digital and global technologies, our young people are well versed in that. And I work in some of those underserved schools in the LA area and historically in the Boston area, and these kids still know how to operate technology. So what we're seeing, though, because of the nature of technology, one of the challenges to interdisciplinarity is the surrender to the team identity that's required to work across boundaries. And we have, for social reasons, gone to this notion of individual rewards for everything people do in their primary and secondary grades. Add to that the instantaneous rewards associated with the digital environment, endless channel choices and endless modifications to your cell phones and things like that. We have a generation of young people for which this is intensifying, where the expectation is that outcomes are immediate, they are 100% personalized, and I really don't have to share with anyone else. And so this, Curtiss put it so well. There is, and use the term generosity, and I would use the term also, but also a surrender that if you're going to be interdisciplinary, you're going to have to give up some of that autonomy and some of that acclaim that goes to the individual, and it has to be distributed because we really are talking about distributed knowledge. And we don't assess appropriately for distributed knowledge. We don't groom and reward appropriately for distributed knowledge. And when we think about reinventing the classrooms, that's going to be one of our biggest challenges. And in fact, we think of the 4 years in high school and the 4 years of college as being completely distinct experiences, when in fact, the last 2 years in high school and the first 2 years of college are the most important 4 out of the 10 years. And how much interaction do we see among high school and college faculty? It's just that those last 2 and then the first 2, that's practically the whole game in getting towards interdisciplinary, getting towards this critical discernment. And so, I think the solution are to break down a variety of boundaries that exist not only within the academy, but within the academy and secondary and middle and primary schools. And we're hoping that the Playa Vista School, for example, will be a model of how that works, because there's no geospatial boundaries anymore. We can walk back and forth. If we can't get it right here, we really need to rebuild the ship.
Yeah.
Right?
Good point. Aliza?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with both of what you stated. And I think mastery of some skill early on is extremely important, and wherever that takes the child, just it's more even about the process of mastery than the content of actually what it's about, because those skills can be transferred. And then as far as early tracking, other cultures, very different approach to what we do in the United States. In Singapore and Europe. In Singapore, for example, the kids are tracked. They have to pass certain exams, and they're tracked. Only certain ones who pass a certain level of exam can go to university. Some go to vocational training. I think we need to bring vocational training back.
Yes.
In a big way. And because they're privileged to go to college, but you know what? It's not for everybody. And we need some hard skills in the market. Those are very valuable. So I think earlier tracking, I think you mentioned, like the last 2 years of high, that many kids, it's not interesting because maybe they're not in, they don't need maybe chemistry or, some of these things that are required, but perhaps in a contextual, in a real life situation, whether it be internships much earlier on, that they can find their path much earlier. I think that's really important.
First thing I'll say is that as a parent who has a middle schooler, allow your child to find their passion and then support that passion. that will lead them into the other things that folks have been talking about. In response to the issue of tracking, I don't have a problem with that as long as we make sure we take it from a systems approach, because the last time they used tracking, I wasn't going to college because of my skin color, not because of how smart I was. So, I mean, so just...
But this is based on merit.
No.
This is only merit.
But what constitutes and how one gets to merit?
Yeah.
If you are hungry in first grade, it's hard to study. If you don't have a book that's workable, that's usable, or you're in a school that doesn't have air conditioning, it's hard to perform, to be seen as having merit, right? I mean, that's why I said we need to take a good look at a systems piece. Not that every kid who comes through there would be the one, but we make an assumption about the other kids that every kid who's in Playa Vista is college worthy, right? I mean, I think for me, and I'll be the first to say, not everybody needs to go to college. Not everybody should be in college. There's a bunch of students in my classes every now and then said, you should think about the Marines. But, so I'm joking, but I mean, they just aren't, whatever the case may be. I'm not opposed to that notion. But if we're going to bring back vocational training at a certain level, at a certain age, we have to let everybody engage in vocational training so everyone find out if that's a passion of theirs, that's what they would rather do, right? But the way we've tried to do tracking in the past, and the way that you track it in Singapore, trust me, the elites get privilege over the non-elites. So it's not a panacea. That said, I think that, at the university level, what I can control now, right? We developed, I have a mini grant program where